Hi everyone, you might have seen in our last video we got a bunch of water plants from Water Garden Paradise. We're doing a little bit of a miniature pond project coming up, but the plants that we got from them were bare root, so I just thought I'd do a quick video showing you how to pot up bare root water plants. It's a little bit different to potting up a normal plant in that you have to use a slightly different type of potting mixture, and the pots are slightly different, etc. So basically, pots, first of all, you can just use regular pots, but it's better if you've got pots that have basically holes in the side. You can get mesh pots from some garden centres, although they're not the easiest thing to find. They basically just look like a sieve, basically a pot that's maybe made out of a plastic sieve. Or you can do what we did, which is just basically used a drill and drilled a bunch of holes in the sides, and of course they've already got the holes in the bottom, so we did that for those, and it just helps the water get in and basically keep when the pots have been sunk into the water, for the water to sort of get in and circulate, and over time, if you've got a large pond, it also allows the roots to grow out into the surrounding pond lining and stuff like that. The first plant that we're going to plant up is a dwarf lily, a water lily. This one's called lemon chiffon. It's a yellow flowered water lily. As you can see, it's got the paper wrapped around it. And if we take that off, there's not a lot of roots on it. But it does have its little growing corm. As you can see, it's got no soil attached to it, but it does have the tiny little roots growing on it. So with planting of the water lily, the first thing we're going to do is half fill the pot with some water planting mixture. Water planting mixture, you can sometimes find suppliers that will sell like a sandy, silty soil. Basically, you can't use regular potting mix because it's too rich, and it will just end up creating it'll just encourage algae and stuff to grow in your pond. So what you want is actually a very low nutrient mixture. Basically, the mixture I've made up is just subsoil. So it's basically, I've dug a big hole in the garden, pulled out a bunch of the subsoil from below the really rich layers, and then I've also added a fine gravel mix. You can also add a fine sand, add some, a bit of sand to it as well if you want to. But basically, you want something that's low in nutrient, but that still has a bit of free draining. You don't want really dense, thick clay, and you don't want anything too rich like a normal potting mix. So we'll half fill the pot. And then with water lilies, they do need a bit of feed. So basically, we've got these slow release fertilizers tablets, and basically for this size pot, I only need half a tablet. So I can break one of those in half. And what I'll actually do is I'll break that again in half so I can put it on two sides of the pot. We then add a bit more mixture just to cover those up. And then what we'll do is we'll add our little water lily to the top of the pot and start to backfill around it. The main thing with water lilies is you don't want to bury the crown. The very top crown of it needs to still be sticking just above the soil layer. Otherwise it can sounds funny in a water situation, but it can rot off if you bury that crown into the soil. So we'll pack that back around like so. And then the other thing to do when planting up plants, water plants in pots, is to add a little bit of fine gravel. So basically, we've got some fine gravel here, and that is to basically stop the soil from washing out of the pot when you water it in, and then when you sink it into the pond, because what can happen is it can then lift up, and all the finest soil can basically lift up and make the pond all dirty and muddy. You'll see as well that we've just lined the pots with paper. I didn't mention that earlier, with just newspaper. It's just to stop, same thing, to stop the soil from washing out the sides of the pot. So that is the water lily done. That one's pretty easy. Next one we've got is a Persicaria. This one is known as the slender knotweed. It is a spreader, so if you're putting it in a big pond, just be aware that it will spread around. It gets up to about 30 centimeters in height, so it's quite a good plant. It'll sort of grow on the edges, but it can also sort of float out a bit into the side of the pond. But yeah, it's a really good plant, especially it's an Australian native, and it's really good for things like frogs and things to nest in and keep those animals protected. So it's a really good one. Pretty much the same process. Half fill the pot. Now with this one, if it's in a large pond, I wouldn't worry about fertilizing it, because water lilies are really need feed, whereas these type of plants will draw, don't need a lot of nutrients. They'll draw most of their stuff out of the pond. Because I'm going to be planting this into actually a very small sort of water pot type of situation. Any pond that's sort of less than 1 meter by 1 meter, probably want to give them a little bit of a feed, because there's not going to be a lot for them to feed off in that pond. So in this instance, I'm just going to use just a quarter of a tablet, because it doesn't need as much. So just one little quarter of a tablet. I'll pop that in there, like so. And then this one, its roots are quite long, so probably don't need to fill it. I didn't need to, and I'll just refill around it. And as you can see, it's got sort of roots that will go out into the water by itself as well. So this one's going to take care of itself pretty well. And same again on the top, just leave enough space to top it off with a bit of gravel. And last but not least, we've got a Carex, which is the Carex. It's common name is tassel sedge. I'll put the full botanical names down the bottom. This one is it's a sedge, a grassy plant. It grows up and has these beautiful little tassely wheaten type sort of drooping heads on them. So this one, I think the three of them will make a really nice sort of contrast between the three. Same thing once again as with the Persicaria. Normally you wouldn't need to fertilize this one if it's in a larger pond, but because this is a much smaller pond, I'm going to give it just a little tiny little bit of a fertilizer feed in there. And we'll just pop those in, backfill around it. More. And top it up again with the gravel. Now, what I would suggest is water them in first from the top. Make sure that they're nice and soaked, because if you just plunge these straight in, the soil, while it's got a bit of moisture in it, it's not fully wet at the moment. And what can happen is when you first plunge it in, if the soil's still a little bit dry, not fully soaked, it can basically lift the whole thing up and out of the pot. So water them from the top first, make sure they're really soaked and well in, and then you can slowly sink them into the pond. And for the time being, we're going to keep these aside until the next video, and we're going to make our pond out the front. I hope you can join us all for that. Stay subscribed to keep up with what we're doing, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.